So I'd like to offer you a warm welcome to the second of the Agile series that we're running as part of the STA talks. This is Paul, who has been working with us on a number of projects and originally comes from the Cabinet Office and has been working on design in various roles most of his life. It's hugely passionate. Paul has been helping us with the volunteer app, with the girl guiding app, and with a number of other designs. Alistair, I think he's working with you even with a sort of gardening charity. So has been a great supporter, and his passion will come through in this course. So I'd like to offer a really warm welcome to Paul. And over to you, Paul. Cool.
Well, yeah, I certainly hope that passion is what comes through and not too much of anything else. So, yep, I'm Paul Carfield, currently interaction designer with the Cabinet Office, working on the civil service jobs platform. I'm also a UX and UI tutor with Career Foundry on their online boot camps. And as already mentioned, I am a hardy now STA volunteer. I guess I should probably also say that I kind of consider myself to be what I've now termed to be professionally curious, but really translates to being a nosy bugger. That will probably come through alongside the rest of things. So that's not going to do that. Let's just click there. There we go. So loosely, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I've kind of already started doing that. It happens. Next, we'll move on to how UX design manifests. In my world, that's kind of more important, I think, than some of the kind of what design could be potentially. There's different ways that it comes out. Finding your design sweet spot. That's kind of something that I think I've found now where I am with the Cabinet Office. So I want to share my views on that because I think it's quite useful for anyone with an interest in design. Go into design stuff within the tech army. And then if there is still time, and I've not talked too much, I'm quite happy to field any questions, but I'm here for the duration. So if people need to reach out to me afterwards, we can happily do so. So to go into me a bit more, degree design development, I took the traditional route into design. I studied multimedia design too many years ago now. I started out as a web designer because UX wasn't a thing then. It wasn't a buzzword term to throw about. Ever since then, I've pretty much been the designer within a development team. So I've picked up various development roles in my time as well. It kind of means I've lived and worked on the internet for, well, over a decade now. It's very much a place that I'm happy. But there are limitations to that. I'm happy in the browser where things come to life. When we start getting closer to a server, that kind of design doesn't really work for me. One thing, I guess, from the design side of things to point out that was my journey. That's kind of how things were always done from what I know back then. Nowadays, as is the case with some of the students I work with Career Foundry, you don't need to go to university. I wouldn't say don't go to university. It's still a good thing. There's many nights that I can't remember that definitely influenced me being the beast that I am now. But, you know, that's how things were. We're where things are now. And the kind of skills that the Tech Army cover up and offer to charities, you know, those digital skills that go across a wide gamut of things, they are the kind of things that you can learn in a bunch of different ways. And sometimes you have to learn them in a bunch of different ways. So that kind of, that learning view of things of design and stuff is kind of what is an underlying drive, passion of mine, is to, now that I work in design, I'm always curious about how I can do more or how I can practice certain things. Because as you can see from the list of deliverables here, a UX designer, as the kind of the broadest term for what I do, covers off a whole bunch of different things about the design life cycle. So, you know, starting off with interviews, coming up with wireframes and prototypes and testing those and then pushing it out and I've deliberately not added in UI design here, because that's kind of, the finer detail side of things. But what I wanted to highlight was that there's so many things that go into it, that make design the powerful thing that it is. So each of these different tasks, the deliverables here, are things that I think I've probably done most of these, aside from maybe the user interviews, with the different projects that I've looked at with the Tech Army, because they're the kind of the fundamental base on which design can then grow. Now, some of these are pretty geeky when you get into things, if you start looking at information architecture, the taxonomies of things, how you arrange content, kind of logically, that flicks my switches. And it's the kind of the technical aspect of design that really kind of resonates with me. But that is the stuff that is there to empower the visual stuff, the interaction, the delight that can come out in the later layers. So like I said, each of these things are elements that, as a designer, I've got UX design here because that's the broad area that I work within. The subsets within that, that focus in on different things that we'll come on to. But this is the aspect of things that a lot of people don't really understand or appreciate or know, how all of these things impact software or website development. There's a lot of design that is kind of generally seen almost as being a bit of a bottleneck. We're waiting for the designer to do the things before we can build stuff. In the agile world, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. There's various methodologies and techniques to be able to work with the developers to create these things and, still have that fundamental layer be put in place. Start for a sip of coffee. Caffeine is also key to my success. But as I look back at this list now, as I said, there's a bunch of different ways in which these items have manifested for me already in the different projects that I've looked at. And as I've spoken with aspiring UX and broader designers, these are exactly the opportunities that working with the projects and the Scottish Tech Army allows you to have. You can get the chance to work on a user journey map for an application and figure out how the application fits into a much larger context and really start to understand users, how they're going to use these things and what you're actually going to help them to achieve. So this is kind of the day-to-day doing the stuff. Now for me, because I have a personal development drive within design, I've now entered the user-centered design job family within Cabinet Office and the wider UK government. But each of these titles I see as being hats that I've worn in various different roles in the past. Excuse me. And for me, this is the future of anybody who's interested in UX design of varying degrees. In various roles, I've covered off these different things. Now that I'm an interaction designer, that is what I've found to be my personal sweet spot. It puts me in a nice happy place where I get to design things visually, but I get to do stuff in code as well. So I get to prototype things, and it's kind of where the two things meet. And for me, that's where I'm happiest, because I don't need to be a full-on developer and not really care too much about the aesthetics, but I don't need to be a graphic designer and care too much about the aesthetics. Nice happy place. Now to get here, it's meant being a web designer, a web developer. I've definitely taken on some marketing things because I kind of understand people from the user experience side of things. I've written content. I've come up with strategies for various things. I guess I've technically done technical writing. I've written about complex things and tried to simplify them. User research is the one design role that isn't necessarily as much about design, but it is crucial to making it all work. So these are the hats that I see that I've worn, and I'm currently happy to be focused on just wearing my interaction designer hat. But my view of things is to if you're really interested in progressing into design in this kind of way, to take a look at these, can share the link to the framework, look at the descriptions for the different roles and reverse engineer your way from there. So if content designer is what you want to be, and you're wanting to be able to craft copy within the context of an application that has their desired impact on a user, that lets them do the thing they're trying to do, then you know that's where you want to go. So you can come back and think, right, okay, there's opportunities to be able to do some content design stuff within the various projects with the tech army. Now that's a skill set that's kind of a difficult one that, you know, when you're coming into kind of copywriting, that's kind of very different to someone who's more interested in graphic design. Words, pictures, the two things can say the same thing, but in very different ways. But I kind of think that finding that future point to aim for is something that's well worth doing now, to then start working on your body of work that will move you in that direction. And I guess the ulterior motive for me with the tech army is to establish our own design focused job family, to be able to have that kind of in-house element whereby we know all the people who are interested in these different things, and to be able to let those with the graphic design knowledge, skills, desire to work on the graphic design aspects across the different projects. Those who are keen content designers to work on the content aspects across different projects. And if you then come back to these different tasks, the way that these break down then starts to become clearer as to the kind of things that you could do. If you want to be a content designer, you might find that you do user interviews because you want to understand the language that people use. You might not do the static wireframing, but you could probably supply the content for a prototype to make sure that it is the right language in the correct tone of voice. You can design the conversation that happens through the process rather than just thinking of design as being the visual aspect. If, like me, you're into the interaction design, you kind of got a foot in the dev and the design camp, then there's all kinds of opportunities there to do things more on the design front from a prototyping point of view, more on the dev front from, you know, crafting front ends, and the happy place that I am right in the middle of it all. And a lot of these things then can be rounded up into a number of different abilities. And I wrote that down on a different computer and I didn't copy it over here, so I've not got my list of abilities, but they are accessibility, usability, findability. Now those three things are where, I guess in the most broadest of senses, that's where design really comes out. So from the accessibility point of view, wording, text needs to be accessible in terms of being in the appropriate language. I guess plain English, you know, it's easy for people to read, but it's also easy for them to understand, to follow the instructions, to be able to move into whatever they're trying to do. The usability side of it, it's kind of where I like to live. That's making things usable, mapping things back to how people expect things to be. If something looks like a button, I would anticipate I could click on it and it would do something. If it doesn't, then I don't know what's going on. And that leaves me, the user, somewhat upset, possibly with myself, that I can't figure out what's going on. And findability kind of comes back again to that information architecture, the taxonomy based view of things, you know, how you structure things so that it makes sense with the mental models that people have in their mind. If I'm on a charity website and I'm trying to find out how I can volunteer, I expect I'm going to find a volunteer section. There's going to be lists of volunteer opportunities and I can find something that I want to go do. If the charity website doesn't present things in that way, then I now need to work harder to figure out how they've grouped things together, because it's not quite how it's been for me in the way that I get exposed to that kind of thing elsewhere. So jumping ahead, and I realize I've been extremely belt fed for this. I put together my slides briefly and I've smashed through all of them because that's what I do. And I'm standing up, so I'm going to be talking quicker anyway. So framing design within the Scottish Tech Army, there are just lots of opportunities to do a bunch of things. I've put get building here because it is it's a construction task we're talking about here. So there's the opportunity to build your network, put me in it. I'll quite happily talk about this to anybody for any length of time, most times of the day and or night. So you can build up your network and be able to get those design peers, because having access to other people that see things and think about things in the same kind of way as you do makes it so much easier to be able to share ideas, grow ideas, and progress with things. You can get the experience working on project work. With that comes the confidence that you do actually know what you're talking about. Now, I said at the start of the call when I was talking to Joanna that I tend to make things up as I go. That's how I operate. I'm big enough and bad enough to get away with it because I say that's what I'm doing, but there's actually quite a bit of experience that drives those outward rash decisions that aren't really actually all that rash. The portfolio aspect of it is something which I've started driving my students, who are generally all based in Germany, but driving them to charity opportunities like this, because it's a really good way to get a diverse portfolio together, which isn't the same as everybody else who's done the same bootcamp course as you have, and has maybe got a banking app or a well-being app in their portfolio. If you have one for a therapeutic gardening charity, there's not going to be just as many of those out there as well. And as I've pointed out, the personal development aspect of it, that for me, I initially joined the Tech Army to do some UI design, because I generally don't get to do that very often in my day job, because the GDS kind of, the design has been done. We just get to do the working part of it. But I've now found myself talking to people about this kind of thing, because once you get me going, it's difficult to get me to stop. But there's so much more opportunity that I have here to help others progress their design ideas. And I keep on saying design, you know, that could come back to the research side of things. I know I've seen a few people who are currently in user research roles. I'm heavily outnumbered by the researchers at work, but you know, some of that comes in through osmosis. In having done my time as various different kinds of designer, I know how those things are used, or how they can be used, and what kind of things you could be doing to promote yourself through your work and push yourself as well, you know, to learn more. So that's kind of become my role here, I think. I've got loads to say on loads of design things. If we want to talk about what kind of date picker we should use within the volunteer app, I've got an opinion on it. And it's generally a fairly kind of professional opinion. I don't make up everything. But equally, you know, if you want to talk about what else could it be? Other things related to design and how to push things forward, how to craft a usable design. I think one of the quotes that always crops up for me is that the best interface is invisible, because realistically, nobody cares what it looks like if you just let them do the thing that they're doing, because they're happy off doing the next thing. That's a perfect result. But it takes a lot of work to get that perfect result. So I guess I'm kind of segueing into questions. I should probably have another sip of coffee. This is my LinkedIn. I should be fairly easy to find, although the hair in the current picture doesn't quite match the lack of hair currently. So do reach out, connect with me on there. Forget the follow. I'm all about the connecting. And if anyone does have any questions now, then I'm happy to shut up for a little bit at least and answer some of those.
Is there anybody with an immediate question?
I have a question.
Hi,
That's
Jack.
Jack. Hello. I was curious about how straightforward the sort of pathway is from, if you're maybe you're a front-end developer and you're much more design oriented. I was curious about how straightforward the pathway is from a position like that into maybe slightly more design heavy, like an interaction designer or some other role.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd kind of almost look at myself as being more curious the other way in trying to increase my dev capacity. But I'd kind of see that in that aspect, you've got a number of different client-facing elements of front-end design, front-end development, which goes beyond the underlying functionality. If you start looking into accessibility, usability, is that kind of, mapping out a user flow? How does someone move through the interface? When someone's moving through a journey within an interface, at each step of the way, what information do they need to know? And what would the interface be expected to look like along the way? Those kind of things, which are, that's almost like applied UX is kind of, I've seen it being keyed up as like UX engineering, as the kind of the really techie end of user experience design. But that's kind of, I think that's for me, that's almost a sweeter spot than where I am right now. But yeah, I mean, there's probably some other things that will crop up in my mind later on in the day. So I can happily share those as and when they come up. But this, I think, is a good conversation to continue. So I'd be very happy to do that, because I'm quite keen to see what opportunities are there, but also how that can progress.
Well, thank you.
No worries. Marcel, I noticed you turn your camera on. Is that to ask a question or no? Jack, that goes quite nicely. Well, oh, Marcel, you can ask a question.
No, actually not. I just want to say sorry that I've been late.
No worries. Welcome. Paul, that's quite nice. And Jack, you touch on something that I found fascinating when I last played with it a little bit, is that findability element and the assumptions you make in where people are going to go and what they perceive an icon to do, versus actually when you observe and watch them move around a screen, and that, aim to make something as frictionless as possible involves probably removing yourself from the conversation a little bit, where you actually need to be many heads and probably in that sense observe people, because the findability and where different people go and look for things isn't the same.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the user research side of things is very much where it all starts. And user research can manifest itself in a bunch of different ways. So it could be, you could do some kind of quick and dirty view of things and see from your website analytics how somebody moves from one page to the next, which elements are the ones that they use most often. That starts to tell a story of what people are looking for. If there's a continual journey, you're potentially finding out that they're looking for something, but they can't quite find it. So you need to see where they're trying to get to down the line to try and surface that a bit sooner. But yeah, I mean, like actually just talking to people and having them perform a task and watching them fail is quite a humbling thing when you've designed what you thought was the right way to do it.
Yeah, one of the tools that I played with briefly, which I really liked, was removed all the design elements and you basically had to follow the menu options. So as a user, you were given the I'm trying to book a room or whatever it is, and then you had to pick the menus that you thought you would get there. And it was amazing how often you didn't get what you thought you would get, just even through the language and that taxonomy element as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of low fidelity view of things, it's something which we've kind of seen bits of it in the volunteer app, in terms of have those designs. But as you move through trying to bring those to life, you kind of think, oh, actually, how does someone get from this point to this point? Because as we know where they start, we know where they want to end up, but we're not quite sure what that interaction part is. How does that look? Is there an interim step, or is it just a transition? Is it a modal? Is it a different destination? So when you reduce the fidelity of it and then actually get to test those things, you can kind of test the underlying content structure of things rather than the visual design, which to a degree can be a distraction. And when you're still trying to understand how people think or how they perceive what you've got there.
Yeah. Is there any other questions from anybody?
It's nice and quick because my passion shines through in the speed with which I talk about things.
Excellent. So, I mean, guys, just so you're aware, one of the things, and I think I really, really liked and want to echo what Paul said, sort of on a couple of the slides, was at the STA, we really want to offer that opportunity to build the network, really to be able to get that peer design support. We are going to be collating elements that people have found that are good. There'll be a huge focus on accessibility and making sure that we're sharing. There is a lot of good work being done on guidelines, there's a lot of supporting stuff, but if we can create enough of a hub, it becomes self-fulfilling, and that allows us to really offer things to charities that are clearly well designed and well articulated. And we can build more consistency into some of the tools we have. So if any of you are interested in getting involved, there's heaps of research, there's heaps of design tools that we want to have a look at to see what works to support the different challenges. You know, we don't always have Google Analytics to support us, so there may be things that we need to kind of look at because most charities don't plug in Google Analytics, unfortunately. So, you know, if you are interested, please do get in touch with Paul, get in touch with myself, because there's a really nice opportunity here to do some good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the kind of the future of it as I see, and it's kind of what, like I said, I'm very happy to not do the hands-on UI design stuff that I'd initially intended to do, because growing this aspect of it is something which can be far more beneficial beyond that. So, you know, rather than me getting to work on 2 or 3 projects, I can hopefully work with a lot of you to influence 2 or 3 dozen projects, which would be a bigger footprint to leave.
And if there's any resources, anything you guys have found that is worth sharing, please do. We have created a dedicated channel on the STA Slack. We kind of will be playing with tools like Figma. So if you're interested in getting involved, please let us know.
Yeah, and if there's aspects of that people want to develop further, then that's a kind of quite an unmet need broadly. From my view of things, is that kind of the practical aspect of it. You know, we can get a course on Udemy, you can learn a tool to build the particular thing that they build in the course, but you don't necessarily then have the same opportunities to find other things to build, to practice the skills that you've just learned, so that you keep them fresh and you actually learn them properly. There's lots of opportunities within the different projects, but I'm kind of, I guess, always thinking about ways to try and do that for myself. I never have the time to do it because there's far too many things that I'm thinking about and doing, but it's wasteful for me to just keep all that stuff to myself. So if anyone else wants to tap into some of the ideas I've got and then do something useful with them, I'm more than happy to share on that front as well.
And if you have opinions on date pickers, we want to hear from you. Brilliant. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm just having to flick through a couple of screens in case anybody looks like they have questions. Brilliant. Well, we're all still here. We're around. There's a number of projects that the STA has that could give you design experience, like actual graphic design, to user research, to flows, to actually being somebody going, yeah, I'm happy to see what you've done and critique it. You know, so don't feel that you have to commit for weeks and weeks, as it were. You know, every opinion is valid because in theory we're all going to use the websites or use the tools. So, you know, we'd love to hear from you. Cool. Right. Thank you, Paul. Brilliant walkthrough there. And I'm definitely going to follow up with a few of those particular topics, because the psychology of design is also something that's fascinating.
That's a whole, that's not even a talk, that's a conference. And
Excellent. Right, thank you so much, everybody. Oh, there's lots of thank yous. I won't read all of them out for you, Paul. I will stop recording now, though.